Hello, I'm Michael Millum, pastor of Amazing Grace Lutheran Church in Lawrenceville, Georgia, and I hope you are blessed by the hearing and preaching of God's Word today.
Christmas is over. Lud and I had a conversation about this before the service started this morning after he got here, because apparently Lud decorates his office and a cubicle that's still assigned to him rather elaborately for Christmas. So he's got a full-size Christmas tree in his office with lights and ornaments and a number of other decorations, and they're still up at his office. So he's still celebrating Christmas, as he announced before our reading this morning. Merry Christmas and Happy New Year. But most of us, I think, have at least mentally moved on at this point. Now, technically speaking, according to the Christian calendar, there's still one more day of Christmas. Christmas ends on January the 6th, known on the Christmas calendar as Epiphany, otherwise known by some people as Little Christmas, or Three Kings Day by our Latin brothers and sisters. But the majority of us who are still working have been back to work now for the better part of a week, and the New Year's festivities are fully behind us. Tomorrow, all the kids are going to go back to school, much to the delight of their parents. And that means Christmas is over for all intents and purposes. I think that most of us have our own Christmas ideals, ideals of what Christmas is as we imagine it in our minds and what it means. And I have found over the years, even though the reality of our celebration of Christmas seldom measures up to our ideals of Christmas, most people don't like it when you mess with their ideals of Christmas. And so therefore, there are things that I am usually reluctant to say about Christmas or suggest to a congregation during those weeks of Advent leading up to Christmas. But now, since we just announced that Christmas is over, I feel more liberated this morning to perhaps say some things to you about Christmas that I would not have been comfortable saying before the new year. Now, if you think about the Christmas cards you receive in the mail, at least those that depict the nativity scene, usually the pictures on the front of the cards are very pristine. You know, the animals always appear friendly. The straw is always nice, bright and yellow and fresh and clean. There's not a hint of manure anywhere. The shepherds don't appear to be the downtrodden working class people that they actually were. Everybody's smiling. Mary never looks like a woman who's been through hours of labor. So this is part of our Christmas ideals that we maintain. I had a good friend a long time ago in Ohio, a colleague who pastored a congregation that put on a live nativity scene every year during the season of Advent, towards the end of it. And it was something that the entire congregation got into. They had their own rudimentary frame of a stable that they would put up. And then, of course, you had people in the congregation who would sign up to play the nativity characters in the live nativity. There was a farmer in the congregation who would supply live animals. The church was built on a busy road, not unlike Lawrenceville Highway out in front of us. And so there were literally hundreds of people who would pass by and see this nativity scene acted out in front of them. But this was Ohio, of course, and temperatures are a lot colder in Ohio in December than they generally are down here. So those who were playing the nativity characters were limited to 20-minute shifts. And then when their shift was up, they would come into the church, warm up, drink some hot chocolate or hot apple cider provided by some of the older members of the congregation who were also involved in this. You had an adolescent Mary and Joseph who at the end of their shift would come into the building and warm up and drink some of that hot cocoa or cider. And then you'd have another pimple-faced Mary and Joseph who would go out front and take their place in the stable for the live nativity scene. And one year there was this young boy in the congregation who was portraying one of the shepherds in the nativity. And at the end of his shift, he came into the building to warm up, and my friend the pastor was there, so he approached the little boy and asked him how he liked being a shepherd in the live nativity. And the child responded by saying, it was okay, but if I do this again next year, I want to be the pirate that was in the manger, in the stable, when Jesus was born. And my friend had no idea how this boy got the idea that there was actually a pirate present at the birth of Jesus, but he also didn't do anything to dash his thoughts or ideas. Now, of course, that's absurd, but then where did people get the idea that Santa Claus was present in the stable? A few years ago, I was surfing through Google Images, looking for a scene in the nativity to copy and then print on our Christmas Eve bulletins. And I came across this elaborately painted nativity scene that showed Santa Claus in his red suit, piously kneeling in front of the manger, praying. And what about the little drummer boy? Where did that idea come from? Can you imagine a child in the stable beating a drum while a woman was in labor? Seriously? I was present at the birth of all three of my children, of course, and when Deb was pregnant with our first child, Drew, of course, we took all the birthing classes, and Deb was trained how to do these breathing exercises to help her cope with her contractions, and I was trained to be the encouraging, supportive husband. I was supposed to be her coach, coaching her through breathing her way past these contractions. But of course, as I said at the outset, the reality never quite lives up to our expectations or anticipations of an event. When Deb finally went into labor in that first pregnancy, we waited until too long to request an epidural. And then as the contractions became more and more intense, Deb, of course, kicked into her breathing exercises to breathe her way through those contractions, and I tried to do what I have been trained to do as well, to encourage and support her, and I was nothing but a distraction. As it turned out, she had to concentrate intently on her breathing to make it through each one of those contractions. So she told me to shut up. And after that, with our next two children, when she went into labor, we told the doctor to give her the drugs. So just imagine a child in the stable while Mary is in labor, beating on a drum. We normally picture Mary as being very meek and mild. But I have to believe that if there was a child there beating on a drum while she was trying to deliver that baby, she would have eventually shouted, "Get that kid with the drum out of here, I'm going to hurt somebody." But that's what we do to the Christmas story. We have edited that story. We have omitted certain things. We harmonize Matthew's story of Christmas with Luke's, two stories that are drastically different from one another. And the reason I think we have done this is to make it more palatable to us, to make it more sentimental. That's part of the problem. We have over-sentimentalized Christmas. But the Christmas story is not a Hallmark special. And it's not a Norman Rockwell painting either. And in fact, what we learn from our gospel reading this morning from Matthew, which takes place after the visit of the Magi to the Christ child. Matthew's version of the Christmas story is as much about the tyranny of King Herod and infanticide as it is about the birth of the Savior. And what this points out to us, which I think is important, is that the world that Jesus was born into was not altogether different than the world we live in today. And that's good news for us, folks. You may remember not too many weeks ago, I talked about the shooting in the Sandy Hook Elementary School in Newtown, Connecticut. You remember that? It happened 11 days before Christmas back in 2012. And I called it a modern-day slaughter of the innocents, which of course is part of our gospel reading this morning. This is the harsh reality of the world that Jesus was born into and the world that Jesus is still a part of in our lives. And the good news in that is that God did not wait until the world became a more peaceful place and until we became more kind and charitable towards one another, until nations resolved not to learn war anymore, until we evolved to become the best version of ourselves. God didn't wait until we created a kinder and gentler place for the Messiah to be born into. God came to the world as it was and comes to the world as it is. Jesus Christ, born, faced the threat of an insecure king who put a hit out on a toddler, of all things. And when he was an adult, endured torture and crucifixion and death. And through his death and resurrection, he redeemed that broken world of violence and us along with it. God's love is too pure and too powerful to be born into a fantasy world. But the problem is that we have idealized the Christmas story, I think, sometimes as a place for us to go and hide out away from some of those harsh realities, rather than using the story of Christmas as a way for us to cope with the realities of the world, which I believe is where the power of that story truly lies. Jesus wasn't born into our nostalgic, snow-blanketed, silent night, peace on earth, suspended reality of Christmas. He was born into what we call the real world. And when you think about it, when we live in a world where just last week, a disgruntled individual walked into a church in Texas, armed, and opened fire on the congregation while they were worshiping, and where, because this is not the first shooting in a church that has occurred in Texas in the last year, some of those worshipers were also packing and returned fire to neutralize that assailant. When we live in a world where these things are not at all that uncommon anymore, where are you going to go and hide to get away from the truth that we live in a deeply troubled and broken world? Jesus doesn't hide from that reality. He takes that on, head on, with us and for us, and is, I think, the presence that enables those who are seeking meaning in some of these events, even if they can't find meaning in it, to be able to navigate their way through the darkness of our world to light and hope. And I'm still perhaps naive enough to proclaim that Jesus Christ is that light and that hope. Blinking lights and little drummer boys aren't going to cut it. Let's take a look again at our nativity scene. We have, of course, the animals. we have the shepherds, Mary and Joseph, the angel of the Lord, and of course, the Christ child. And now, tomorrow on January the 6th, we have on the calendar the arrival of the Magi, who have trekked the long road from the east, bearing their gifts to worship Christ. And so after today and tomorrow, the nativity scene is complete. Or is it? I had this strange thought this last week as I was working on my sermon, that maybe there's one character we should still add to the nativity scene. Although I've never seen a nativity that actually had this character in it, it seems to me that maybe it would be fitting to have a King Herod figurine to put in there as well, because he is a major part of Matthew's version of Christmas. We've all heard Christians chant the slogan, "Keep Christ in Christmas." And this is a sentiment that I agree with wholeheartedly, because I believe that our commercialized cultural celebration of the holiday has all but pushed Christ out of Christmas. But while we are busy keeping Christ in Christmas, maybe we should also keep Herod in Christmas, because Herod is a reminder to us of the world that we live in and the world that Jesus Christ was born into, a world that is deeply broken and sinful and in need of redemption. And God loved us enough to send his Son into that world as it was for the sake of our salvation. Another major theme of Christmas and Epiphany is light and darkness. You may remember in the gospel reading last Sunday from John, we hear John declare, "The light came into the world, and the darkness was not able to overcome it." That is our good news. There is so much darkness in our world, and we can point to it easily. It's all around us. It's very obvious to us. And yet, in the midst of all of that, the gospel still declares that as dark as things get, it will never be able to extinguish the light. Not the darkness that's caused by you and me, or by King Herod, or by school and church shooters, or by ISIS, or any of the other perpetrators of evil and terror in our world. The brilliant light of Jesus Christ still shines. It shines for us, for you and me, and it shines for the perpetrators as well. It shines for everyone.